Hey everybody, Bob Schlenker of the Open Scroll here. Yeah, we're looking at Luke chapter 17. There's a fantastic account in there, and I've focused on it for many years now. And I was recently inspired to take another look at the structure of the passage. And I'll show you a legacy version. I'll show you a study that it's centered around and supporting, and then I'll go through the new version. So in Luke 17 verses 5 through 19, if you're not familiar with it, I recommend you give it a read, the whole chapter, and especially focus on 5 through 19. And it looks as though they're all independent accounts, but there's a relationship there that's really important. So I talk about this study called Increase Our Faith, the Hidden Treasure of Luke 17 verses 5 through 19. And this is part 2 in a series called Keys to Developing a Hearing Ear. So I've worked out 2 different versions of the design of this profound passage of Scripture. These are so compelling that I felt it necessary to present both of them here. I invite you to hover your mouse cursor over or tap on, if using a touchscreen device, the presentation's lines of text and vertical bars to compare the colorful thematic pairings that are dynamically represented therein. For more instruction, read the directions found at the bottom of the page. If this is new to you, you're unfamiliar with it, please do go down and read the directions and then explore like we're going to be doing. And this study, Increase Our Faith, if we look at that, you'll see that it's a second of 4, and you'll see that if you're familiar with it, this is a new version. Yes, I was inspired to update it and add some more recent insight, and I believe it's better. It was good before, and I believe it's much better now, and I hope to be putting out a video on that soon. So with this having 2 versions, one is considerably different from the other. And you may think, well, to find one version is quite remarkable, that one version actually exists in the text. To find 2 that are legitimate, wow. Where's the precedent for that? Well, glad you asked, because fairly recently I was inspired to tackle 1 Corinthians 11 verses 1 through 17 again. And I worked out 2 very different versions of the design of that passage of Scripture, and they're both presented here on this page. You'll see this one is what I call a 10 plus 10 chiasm. A chiasm is a structure that repeats, and it repeats in inversion. It's in reverse order repetition. So the first is repeated, and it's the last. And the second is the second to the last. And as you watch, as I move my cursor down, you'll see verse 17 at the bottom is highlighted along with verses 1 and 2. And then as I continue down in this column, you see that's exactly how it goes. And in the middle, they're right next to each other. This is the pivot point of the inversion. It's the center of the chiasmus. It's called a chiasmus because of the Greek letter X. And so when it goes out like that, it's more like a sideways V, but it crosses over, so consider it like an X, like one side of an X, right? So when we talk about the 2 different versions here, I'm going to focus on the one that I did just very, very recently. But I want to introduce this first one, which is a legacy version that I put up. And to have a second version doesn't make the first one not compelling, because it's very compelling. It's completely legitimate. And this structure has a form that's a 2 plus 2 chiasm in verses 5 through 10. And I show that here what's in spanned by this bar is repeated here with this bar. And how is it repeated? Well, it's repeated in reverse order. It's a chiasm. So this would be, if you want to label it, A, and verse 10 is A prime, and then we have a B, 7 and 8, and a B prime, verse 9. So it's a 2 plus 2 chiasm. There's 4 elements, 2 repeated in another 2. And so verses 11 through 19 are different. I show it as a 4 plus 4 parallelism. And so I'm talking about this level where verses 11 through 14 are repeated in 15 through 19. How so? Well, they're repeated in the same order and in 4 parts. So this would be the A prime, and the B prime, C prime, and the D and D prime. And is that legitimate? Well, you could take some time and look through it to yourself, and then there are some further subdivisions that you can also explore. Now, the second version is of particular interest. The second version presents verses 5 through 10 as a 3 plus 3 chiasm, and verses 11 through 19 as a 5 plus 5 chiasm. The structural parallel is seen in how the units at the pivots are the only ones that have subdivisions, and they both present as 2 plus 2 parallelisms. Yeah. The pivots naturally receive the most emphasis. That's just always the case with a chiasm. And when the subtle message is grasped, this feature makes the version and the powerful message it reinforces extremely compelling. And what is that powerful message? Well, you can see that in the study Increase Our Faith. The author is greatly to be praised for his handiwork and for his kindness toward those of us who, like the apostles, want to increase our faith. So let's take a look at the structure. 3 plus 3 chiasm in verses 5 through 10, right? So here's how I break it out. A and A prime, B and B prime, and then the C and C prime is expanded. And the first part of it is the first 2 lines of this 4-line parallelism, a 2 plus 2 parallelism. Parallelism means it's repeating. This verse 7 is repeated in verse 8 in the same order. A prime, B prime. Sequencing, right? So then in the verses 11 through 17, I'm calling it a 5 plus 5 chiasm. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts repeated in the inverse order. And again, just like we saw up here, it's at the pivot where there's a repetition, and it's the same kind of structure. It's a parallelism, 2 plus 2, and it's very interesting. Very, very interesting because it's a rather rare construction. And I make this point in some commentary. These 2 colored bars are showing a point finger cursor, so they can be clicked on. And what happens? Well, it brings up this commentary, right? So I'm going to read this first one. In this version of the structure of Luke 17, 5 through 19, we find paired chiasms. There is a profound sense in which what appears in verses 5 through 10 is repeated in 11 through 19. This is all regarding the question asked by the apostles and the Lord's response to it. Consider the first section as theory, or classroom instruction, and the second as its practical demonstration. Verses 5 through 10 again present as a 3 plus 3 chiasm, while verses 11 through 19 present as a 5 plus 5 chiasm. In each, the unit at the pivot is the only one that subdivides, and in both instances, they exhibit a 2 plus 2 parallelism. Now, in the next comment, which is on verses 5 through 7, a kind of structure that I've rarely, if ever, seen has a very important role to play in this passage. The rarity captures our attention and gives special emphasis. This rare form appears not once, but twice in this passage. The point is made that the two parts are meant to be compared. This affirms my insight about the connection, that the lesson about faith and the servant's duty is demonstrated by the encounter with the lepers. Yes, it's quite an observation. It's quite an insight. And it's supported by the structure when you discern it in this particular way. The rarity involves the way the parallelism is placed at the pivot of a chiasm. It's a special way. I could go on at length and offer a description using the familiar labeling of constructions like A, B, C, sub A, sub B, C prime, sub A prime, sub B prime, B prime, A prime. But, yeah, that gets confusing. It's easy to get lost. But here's another approach. When I present a 2 plus 2 parallelism, it's my custom to use 3 bars to visually group them. One bar spans all 4 lines. In a column just to the right of that, one bar will span the first 2 lines and another will span the last 2. This is almost always the case when the 4 lines are consecutive. When they're not consecutive, which isn't that uncommon, there is, of course, no single bar that's going to span just those 4 lines. Are you following me? It just makes sense. So, the 2 plus 2 parallelism of verses 7 and 8 spans 4 consecutive lines. You can see that over here. 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. I have the 2 bars, right? But it's not suitable to span them with the bar because they're at the pivot of a chiasm. See, here's the pivot of a chiasm. 1, 2, 3 parts, and then 3, 2, 1, right? So if I put a bar spanning these two, it really interferes with the construction at the higher level because this is part of the chiasm. If I combine these lines into one and these 2 lines into one to make verse 7 a part of what's being repeated in a single line, and 8 in a single line, that's perfectly legitimate, right? And then it's the same 3 plus 3 chiasm, but it really fairly obviously subdivides, and so we should subdivide it that way. And so we have, and it's this parallelism that's begun here in this first part, and it's not completed until the second. Okay, so the parallelism applies in the same exact way down here in 15b through 16b. Yeah, so this is rare, and then it's exactly the same down here. And so even though this is a 3 plus 3 and this is a 5 plus 5, it's got the same rare situation where at the pivot it's a breaking apart into kind of remote sets, this parallelism construction. 2 lines are matched by the other. So yeah, it gets kind of awkward to just keep talking about it, but the simplicity is seen in just examining the structure and recognizing that this is an accurate reflection, a very legitimate analysis, and based upon that, we know that the visual that we're seeing here, pairing these two sections, is the author's handiwork. And he's done that, well, not just to impress us with his ability to do such a thing, especially when it comes doubled, or who knows how many layers there really are, right? How many different ways that a legitimate structure is being formed here on this scale, and then also in the greater scale of where it sits in context. Yeah, I think we're just scratching the surface here, even when we're talking about two distinct structures. So here, let's take a look at the central points. Okay, so will any one of you, in verse 7, who has a servant plowing or keeping sheep, say to him when he has come in from the field, come at once and recline at table? Will he not rather say to him, prepare supper for me and dress properly and serve me while I eat and drink, and afterward you will eat and drink? It's a complete thought and construction, right? And so here it is in the first part. Will any of you who has a servant say to him, will not he, one of you who has a servant, say to him, the servant? So clearly there's a match, right? And then here's what's said. Do this. Here's the command, right? And again down here, here's the command. Do this. Obvious, right? Okay, so down here we have something very similar going on. And when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice, and he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. So here we have the servant, really, because we're talking about a master and a servant down here, right? And so who's the servant here? Well, it's this leper. That's the comparison. When he saw that he was healed, he turned back. And so here's his response to what happened, his healing. And then here's his response. So here, physically, he's going out and he turns back. And what does he do? He falls on his face at Jesus' feet. And there's an additional part of this. It's what's being said, right? Like here, what's being said. And here, again, right? What's being said in the B parts. Same. There's what's said. Here's what's said. And here it's the servant being told by the master. And here it's the master being told by the servant. Clearly a relationship there. Because here the leper is praising God with a loud voice and giving him thanks. Two separate things? Not necessarily. Probably there's a mix. And this is obviously drawing our attention to the parallel. It's giving emphasis to what's happening here in connection with what's happening here. So here's the classroom instruction. The apostles said to the Lord, increase our faith. Increase our faith. Lots to be said about that. Again, I refer to this study. And what we see in verse 10, in a match to that, here's Jesus giving him a very direct response to their question, where he's not doing what he's doing in between, he's giving a direct response. He says, so you also, when you have done all that you were commanded, say, we are unworthy servants. We have only done what was our duty. Unworthy of what? Of further increase or reward. Because we've only done what is our duty. His point is implied. Go beyond duty. Don't just do even all you're commanded. That's unworthy of increase. If you want your faith increase in your service as a servant, be a servant worthy of increase and go beyond duty. That's the principle that he's teaching here. So, what goes on in the middle? Here the Lord says, if you had faith like a grain of mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it would obey you. Oh, obedience. So there's a master and a servant again, right? It's a matter of authority, relative authority. That's what he's initially teaching, and this is a correction of their wrong thinking, because they think they need more faith, but that's not the point. It's having authority. That's what it's a matter of, and that's what he's saying by giving this response. And what does that have to do with their lesson? Does he thank the servant because he did what was commanded? And he's not talking about the mulberry tree thanking the one who's commanding, right? Just makes sense. What is he talking about? Well, in the greater context of this lesson, you see that thanks is an additional unwarranted benefit. It's unmerited. No bonus is required because, the servant simply does what's commanded. And he's making reference to what we talked about here. Will any of you who has a servant plowing or keeping sheep say to him when he comes in from the field, come at once and recline at table? No, 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 no. He will not. Will he not rather say to him, prepare supper for me and dress properly and serve me while I eat and drink, and afterward you will eat and drink? And so there's a proper relationship there. And he doesn't thank the servant because that's not warranted. It's just not how things are with the master and a servant. The master commands, the servant obeys. But if a servant wants some increase in benefit, then there's a way to do that. And he says, so you also, apostles, your servants, when you've done all that you were commanded. Big lesson. Okay, so class over. Finished the lesson, moving on, right? And now for something not really completely different. This is a demonstration. On the way to Jerusalem, he was passing along between Samaria and Galilee. I'll read through this whole thing first here. And as he entered a village, he was met by 10 lepers, who stood at a distance and lifted up their voices, saying, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. When he saw them, he said to them, go and show yourselves to the priests. Implicit promise there, right? And as they went, they were cleansed. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice, and he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. Now he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus answered, were not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? And he said to him, rise and go your way. Your faith has made you well. And that's a text that's often abused at the hands of preachers of the gospel. So I address that again in Increase Our Faith study. So in this, we've already looked at the parallel here with the 2 plus 2 parallelism, right? And so let's work our way through the chiasm outside towards the inside. Verse 11, on the way to Jerusalem, he was passing along between Samaria and Galilee. In verse 19, we're talking about Jesus again, that's he, rise and go your way. Go. Yep, he's sending him on his way. And here he is on his way. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus, was passing along. So there's a parallel, right? And in the next set, verse 12, as he entered into a village, he was met by 10 lepers who stood at a distance. Verse 13, and lifted up their voices, saying, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. In verse 18, was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? Well, who's he talking about? No one. Well, from verse 17 here, talking about 10 being cleansed, was no one. Well, no one of the 10 except this foreigner. So yeah, where's the 9? And so here, the 10 lepers. And this is what the 10 lepers are doing, all together as one. And here they're not together as one. There's a separation in the rank. Yep, but that's the common basis there. So in the next set, when Jesus saw them, the lepers, he said to them, go and show yourself to the priests. And as they went, they were cleansed. Yep. Who were cleansed? The 10, right? The 10 lepers. When he saw them, the 10 lepers, he said to them, the 10 lepers, you 10, go show yourselves to the priests. And as they, all 10, went, they were cleansed. Were not all 10 cleansed? Yes. Jesus answered, and here is Jesus giving the command. So clearly a match. Now our last set to consider, 15a, then one of them, 16c, now he, that one, was a Samaritan. Not really too difficult when it's broken out this way and presented in this matter. It's pretty easy to see how they compare. And it's a fantastic lesson. And yeah, to make the point, I've got the commentary here, right? And this is spectacular how the author has organized the structure on this level to support the idea, the important idea of the connection between this doctrinal lesson and the practical application. What he does is not say, and to make his point, this happened. Nowhere does he say that. But is that what's going on? I think it should be really, really obvious. And when the Lord opens this kind of thing to you, this is for the hearing ear. This is for the seeing eye. This is the benefit, one of the great benefits of having developed a seeing eye and a hearing ear, because it's not just for now and a blessing to us now to be able to tap in to this knowledge and wisdom and understanding. There's a enduring benefit. And this is how the Lord is with his people. And he wants us to gain in our relationship with him, to have an increase in faith, which will manifest in the spiritual realm as having authority. He will elevate us in our stature in the kingdom. It's not that we want to rule, it's that we serve. And this is something that I take a little bit of effort to emphasize in this study on increasing faith. And I call this the hidden treasure of Luke 17:5 through 19, because you won't find very many people calling out the relationship between 5 and 10 and 11 and 19, because even though I've had this article up for many, many years, most people do not have an ear for it. It doesn't appeal to them. I know some people think, well, I'm really good at decoding symbols and catching little details in movies and so on. And that's a small part of what I do. I spend a lot of time and effort in that. But really, the core of what I do is I'm a minister sent to the bride of Christ. Not just the body, but to prepare the bride of Christ. And this is a mission that's ongoing. And I kind of have in the people who are following the open scroll some who pay attention to one aspect of what I do, others a subset of that, and others more broadly across the full spectrum, who truly have a hearing ear and can appreciate when the Lord lays out his pearls, whether it's me presenting them or others. Most people, when you present the pearls, like in Matthew 7, they'll trample them in the mud. Yeah, they'll turn and trample you. And so you want to be judicious, I guess would be the right word, about how you share these things and where you share them. Here I haven't hidden this behind a paywall or put some other obstacle up. You don't have to come to a special school and pay a lot of tuition, or go to a special seminar, and there's no requirement like that. You don't have to invite me in for personal teaching at wherever it is that you live. This is what the Lord has had me do, presented on the internet right there. But as I've written elsewhere in the study of Keys to Developing a Hearing Ear, with regard to the hidden treasure of Luke 8 in part 1, you have to come in to see the light. And so one of my prayers is that the Lord will draw people to the light wherever his ministers are shining it forth, and that he will prepare them for the things to come in this age and in those to come after. And there will be many. And the Lord's so gracious and generous with his people. That's all I have to share today. God bless everybody. Bye-bye.